Order!
O God, may your spirit and guidance be with us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspiration of those whom we serve. Amen.
Good afternoon, members. Minister's statement. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this Legislative Assembly had made a mandate commitment to develop a territorial climate change strategy that takes into account northern energy demands and the cost of living while reflecting international and national commitments to lower greenhouse gas emissions, exploring options for carbon pricing systems, and capturing local alternatives. The people of the Northwest Territories are concerned about the changes they are noticing to the land and water. They want to be part of the improved planning and communication around climate change, renewable energy and energy efficiency, and they have expressed interest in transitioning to a lower carbon economy. The 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework, which will be publicly released this spring, will address the concerns and interests of our residents through three key objectives. One is transitioning to a strong, healthy economy that is 30% less reliant on fossil fuels. Two, improving our understanding of climate change impacts on the N.W.T. and building resilience and adapting to a changing climate. Mr. Speaker, the 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework was developed through extensive engagement with Indigenous, community, territorial and federal governments, stakeholders such as industry and non-government organizations, and N.W.T. residents. It also addresses many of the findings and recommendations outlined in the climate change audit released by the Office of the Auditor General in October. During the most recent round of public engagement, we received 145 detailed comments which were compiled and incorporated as appropriate into the framework. The amount of feedback received demonstrates the importance of this issue to Northerners. A What We Heard document summarizing these comments is being finalized and will be posted on the Department of Environment and Natural Resources website in the coming weeks. Following the release of the Climate Change Strategic Framework, an action plan for its implementation will also be finalized. This plan will guide the N.W.T. as we begin work to achieve the goals outlined in the framework over the next 5 years. Annual reviews will ensure that we are making progress. Every 5 years, another 5-year action plan will be developed so we continue to meet the coming challenges and opportunities presented by climate change. Partnerships with Indigenous governments, communities and stakeholders will be critical for the successful implementation of the action plan. Environment and Natural Resources will continue strong leadership and coordination within the N.W.T. and with other provinces, territories and federal government to ensure its success. Mr. Speaker, when it is completed, the 2030 Climate Change Strategic Framework will closely align with related plans and strategies being developed by our government, including the 2030 Energy Strategy, the N.W.T. Petroleum Resource Strategy, and our approach to carbon pricing in the N.W.T. This coordinated approach to energy and climate change will build on our previous successes to ensure the future sustainability of our communities and lay out a clear vision that will benefit all N.W.T. residents. This work will take time to achieve, Mr. Speaker. But with a clear plan, we will all benefit from this long-term vision for generations to come. The government has worked diligently to ensure the voices of our Indigenous governments, communities and residents have been included in this comprehensive framework that will provide us with a roadmap to greater climate change mitigation, resiliency and adaptation over the next 12 years. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to provide their input into the future of climate change mitigation and adaptation in the Northwest Territories, and I look forward to bringing forward the 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework this spring. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister statement. Minister Ike Godinide, Minister Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to provide members with an update on the N.W.T. On the Land Collaborative. We know that the On the Land programs contribute to community wellness, healing, healthy living, and environmental stewardship and protection. These are fundamental goals to our government's mandate. Residents have also been clear in telling us that opportunities to be on the land are important to them. That is why, in addition to community wellness and programming support, our government worked with partners to launch a new type of funding model, the N.W.T. On the Land Collaborative, 3 years ago. The funding collaborative approach brings people together, government, the charitable sector, business and industry, and other community partners so we can combine our efforts and pool our resources, including funding, expertise, tools and equipment, and other supports. The Department of Health and Social Services was a proud partner in the creation of the N.W.T. On the Land Collaborative in 2014 and has continued to work closely with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Tides Canada, the N.W.T. Recreation and Parks Association, as the administrative and leads for this collaborative. At its heart, the collaborative's goal is to find new approaches to meet shared priorities across sectors. Business, government, and charitable organizations contribute financial as well as human resources collectively to maximize the overall impact and benefits to N.W.T. residents. This partnership approach has shown great success towards improving the lives and well-being of N.W.T. residents and has proven to be an efficient and effective use of resources. Mr. Speaker, one of the most innovative elements of the collaborative and one of its key successes is the participation of community advisors who are appointed by participating Indigenous governments. We have been fortunate to have representatives from the N.W.T. Regional Corporation, the Gwich'in Tribal Council, Tlicho Government, Decho First Nation, N.W.T. Métis Nation, and the Acacho Territory Government sitting at the table as equal partners throughout the creation and collaboration of its ongoing work. Community advisors are an amazing resource for anyone applying for funding through the collaborative, and they contribute a huge amount of time and efforts towards helping people through the application process. They also provide invaluable insight and guidance to the other partners to help them make good decisions about how to allocate funding. With the help of the community advisors and the continued commitment of funding partners, this innovative approach to support land-based programming has seen tremendous success since it was first launched and has reached an important milestone this year. Mr. Speaker, this year, the N.W.T. On the Land Collaborative has successfully grown its funding pot to $1 million. To provide some context, 3 short years ago, the collaborative distributed $381,850 to 35 projects in year 1, followed by $634,845 for 35 projects in year 2. Now, with $1 million available this year, the collaborative will support 48 land-based initiatives across the territories, with more than half of those projects receiving full funding. This remarkable growth is made possible through the increased support of existing partners and by welcoming new partners to the table. 2 more N.W.T. departments have joined the collaborative and have committed funding and time this year. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues from the Departments of Education, Culture and Employment and Industry, Tourism and Investment for seeing valuable in the work that the collaborative makes possible. I'd also like to recognize my colleagues from the Department of Environment and Natural Resources who was an early partner to support this initiative. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I want to acknowledge and congratulate the other sector partners for believing in the On the Land Collaborative and for recognizing their continued support. Tides Canada, Dominion Diamond Corporation, the N.W.T. Parks and Recreation Association, the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, Diavik Diamond Mine, Health Canada, and the Gordon Foundation. As has been the case in previous years, a wide range of grant amounts and project types will be supported in 2018. Small grant recipients include the ice fishing program in N.W.T and a land and culture-based retreat for the LGBTQ+ students and their allies in the South Slave. Medium-sized grants will allow the Ulahukta Community Corporation to run a summer language camp for young people in their community, and Chief Julius School in Fort McPherson to immerse students in traditional Gwich'in culture while traveling on the Peel River. Large grants have been awarded to the Decho First Nation Stewardship and Guardian Program and the Toledo Dene Band walking journey along traditional trails for elders and youth. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the collaborative partners, I want to congratulate all of the recipients and thank all of the applicants for their leadership and dedication to on-the-land activities in their communities. I also want to recognize all of the partners whose continued commitment to the N.W.T. On-the-Land Collaborative is supporting meaningful programming to our communities and is contributing to the health and wellness of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister statement. Minister Ike Godani, the Minister Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, as per the mandate of the Government of Northwest Territories and the commitments made in the 25-year transportation strategy, the Government of the Northwest Territories has been working to secure funding to advance planning and construction of critical transportation corridors in the Northwest Territories. The Government of the Northwest Territories' 3 proposed transportation corridors, the Toledo All-Season Road, the Slave Geological Province Access Corridor, and the Mackenzie Valley Highway, will bring great benefits to the Northwest Territories. These corridors will connect residents to services they rely on, stabilize the cost of living, provide well-paying jobs and training opportunities, and increase our resiliency to the effects of climate change. The corridors will also support northern industry and businesses by providing a gateway for increased trade and development. We are getting closer to improving access to the residents of the Toledo region. The Toledo All-Season Road project will be funded using P3 model, with the Government of Canada covering 25% of the costs, and in December of 2017, the Government of Northwest Territories signed the final financial agreement for the project with Canada and issued a request for proposal for construction. The 3 preferred proponents identified through the request for qualifications stage were invited to submit proposals. The RFP was released in alignment with the environmental regulatory schedule and will allow ample time for the proponents to prepare the required documents. A report of the environmental assessment is expected to be released by the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board later this month. Mr. Speaker, as we await critical decisions regarding the Toledo All-Season Road, the Government of Northwest Territories continues to work with the federal government to deliver meaningful investment in 2 other transportation corridors. In November of last year, the Government of Northwest Territories submitted comprehensive project proposals for the Slave Geological Province Access Corridor and the Mackenzie Valley Highway to Transport Canada for funding considerations under the National Trades Corridor Fund. Up to $400 million in funding is being dedicated to the transportation projects in the 3 territories under this program. The funding allocation to projects will be based on merit, with a focus on trade and corridor efficiency and reliability. Construction of an all-weather road into the Slave Geological Province Access Corridor would address the lack of access to this mineral-rich part of Canada. The project would increase our resiliency to impacts of climate change while significantly reducing associated additional costs and operational difficulties with the mining industry. All-weather road access would also support the delivery of green energy projects such as the Tulsan Hydro Expansion Project, which we would ensure a more sustainable energy system for the Northwest Territories and Canada. Extension of the all-weather Mackenzie Valley Highway would increase intercommutability in the Satu region. The Government of Northwest Territories is working closely with the Satu Secretariat Incorporated to advance the project. The highway would replace the existing winter road into the region, which is currently affected by the impacts of climate change, resulting in increased maintenance costs, travel and resupply delays, and potential safety risks. It would allow for increased traffic volumes and waits along this corridor, resulting in efficiencies in delivery of essential goods and lowering the cost of living in communities. Increased economic development could be enabled by providing increased access to mineral and petroleum resources in the region and reducing costs of production and exploration. The Government of the Northwest Territories' proposal under the National Trades Corridor Fund identified funding for all project phases, with a focus on the next priority phases. This includes replacement of the Frank Channel Bridge for the Slave Geological Province Access Corridor and construction of the Great Bear River Bridge for the Mackenzie Valley Highway, and undertaking environmental assessment and planning activities for both projects. It is anticipated that the decisions around this first round of proposals will be announced in April. These project proposals will also be shared with Canada Infrastructure Bank, as there is significant opportunity to fund other phases of both projects under the bank. The Infrastructure Bank will provide $35 billion over 11 years using loans, loan guarantees, and equity investments. The bank will focus its investments on large, transformative, revenue-generating projects, including transportation networks. At this time, we are still awaiting additional details about the operation of the bank. Mr. Speaker, we are in early days with regards to the extension of the all-weather Mackenzie Valley Highway and the Slave Geological Province Access Corridor. As we move towards securing funding for the projects, we continue to engage Indigenous groups and work with them to take advantage of benefits that projects will bring. We will also work closely with these groups and our counterparts in the Department of Natural Resources, Environment and Natural Resources to ensure ongoing protection of wildlife and the natural environment. Mr. Speaker, strong, effective partnership with the federal government and Indigenous governments are essential to the success of these projects. Together, we can improve transportation conductivity across the territory, helping achieve our social and economic goals and improve the quality of life for the North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can you feel it? Can you feel the excitement? It's in the air because the 2018 Arctic Winter Games are almost here. The towns of Hay River and Fort Smith have been busy for the past 3 years getting ready for the 25th Arctic Winter Games, and now the final preparations are being made to put on what will undoubtedly be the biggest event this territory has seen in the past decade, and that's being modest. We're less than a week away from the opening ceremonies on March 18th at the Hay River Recreation Centre. Mr. Speaker, what a way to break in the brand new rec centre. And when I say brand new, I mean brand new. It opens tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, it's a thing of beauty. That facility is undeniably the most beautiful sports and rec centre in the N.W.T, and it alone is worth a trip to Hay River. The opening ceremonies will be a spectacular that you don't want to miss, but that's just one of the many things to see and do during the week-long games. Do you like sports? There'll be badminton, ski biathlon, snowshoe biathlon, dene games, dog mushing, futsal, gymnastics, hockey, snowshoeing, volleyball, wrestling. I'm still going, Mr. Speaker. There'll be Arctic sports, basketball, cross-country skiing, curling, figure skating, snowboarding, speed skating, and table tennis. Hay River's hosting 11 events. Fort Smith is hosting 9. There'll be competitors from Nunavut, Yukon, Nunavik, Northern Alberta, Greenland, Alaska, Yamal, Russia, Sampi, and of course the Northwest Territories. The 353 members of Team N.W.T include athletes, coaches, mission staff, and cultural performers. And I have to give a shout out to the participants from Hay River North. Athletes Trey Beck, Riella Bordy, Nicole Griffiths, Lane Leonard, Chandel Leonard, and coach Therese Forty. If sports aren't your thing, that's not a problem, Mr. Speaker, because each contingent is bringing cultural delegates that will showcase cultures and talents from around the circumpolar world. There will be daily cultural performances in Fort Smith, and a cultural gala on March 23rd at Fort Smith's Catholic Cathedral. The Arctic Winter Games Marketplace will be held at the Chief Sunrise School Gym at the N.W.T First Nation Reserve, and it will be a must-see. There's also be a number of exhibits and workshops in both communities that you won't want to miss. There's going to be a lot to see, so don't forget to bring your camera. And when you're taking a selfie with Ketchy, the AWG mascot, don't forget to wear your official Arctic Winter Games gear available at stores throughout the South Slave. Finally, thank you to the host society, the sponsors, and all the volunteers who are making these games a reality. And of course, good luck to all the athletes. So come one, come all, and find your power at the 2018 Arctic Winter Games. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What a way to start Monday afternoon. Member statement. Member Ike Goodin and the member Frame Lake.
Can top that. So I attended a public meeting on the giant mine remediation project last week. This will be the largest ever project for Yellowknife at over $1 billion, with up to 250 to 300 jobs for at least 10 years, then jobs in perpetual care. The federal government awarded the main construction management contract to U.S.-based Parsons Incorporated, a U.S. company. The $600 million contract will begin as early as 2020 and may run as long as 22 years. While our community continues to deal with the terrible legacies of the giant mine, the remediation represents a very significant opportunity for major socioeconomic benefits. Unfortunately, the federal government does not have strong procurement requirements for northern benefits. For example, in the main construction management contract, only 10% of the total hours are targeted for Indigenous employees, with only a 2% penalty if the target is not met. The federal government wants to use Parsons to manage the remaining work and incorporate unknown northern targets. There does not appear to be any overall socioeconomic benefit strategy with clear targets or binding minimum requirements. Not good enough. For the diamond mines, northern employment targets range from 30 to 60%, increasing during operational phase. Local purchase of goods and services targets range from 28 to 70%, again increasing with the operational phase. There are additional requirements for literacy training, employment of women, monitoring and reporting. None of these things seem to be in place for the giant mine remediation. This project has the potential to develop world-class expert capacity in remediation, management, supply, and technology. A huge amount of remediation work is still required in the north, including the more than 700 sites identified under the devolution agreement, and others such as Norman Wells and Faro in the Yukon. There have to be better ways to ensure Northerners benefit from the remediation at Giant Mine. To get around federal restrictions, we need a formal socioeconomic agreement for this project so that funds flow through N.W.T, as we seem to be able to incorporate more comprehensive targets than the federal government is willing to set. I'll have questions for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources about northern benefits to be gained from giant mine remediation and how we can begin to develop the remediation economy. Mussy, Mr. Speaker.
Mussy. Member statement. Member Ike Goodin and the member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in times of hardship, the communities of the Nehende riding always come together. A valuable member of the riding is Darcy Lafferty of Fort Simpson. For the last couple of years, Darcy has been a reliable non-medical escort for many patients in the Nehende riding. He's realized the value of being a non-medical escort after he escorted his father when he was ill. Darcy began accompanying friends and family so that he could be there for them in their time and needs, like he was there for his father. Soon enough, Darcy became known as a very reliable escort by all patients, so they began to request him by name. Thus far, Darcy Lafferty has escorted patients on more than 70 appointments. Although most trips are to Yellowknife, Darcy has accompanied patients to Edmonton. His longest trip was 6 days long. He sits next to the patients going to and from the appointment, or to the Yellowknife for Edmonton, and riding and back home, to and from appointments, and calming their nerves when they are nervous. He's relied upon by the patients and residents. He puts them at ease and ensures that the patients knows what's going on. He's punctual in getting them to their appointments and making sure he has all the patients need. Darcy's always prepared for himself. He always has a packed bag at home in case he comes back from escorting one patient and has to go to the next day escorting another. Despite facing difficult challenges during certain medical trips, Darcy continues to serve with a smile and continues to accept patients when requested. Darcy's commitment while escorting patients is 24/7, never leaves the patients even during times outside of the medical appointment. Darcy is reliable that other patients at the boarding home who Darcy is not escorting will request his assistance. Darcy gladly helps them out after checking with the patient he's escorting and is okay with them. Mr. Speaker, Darcy has served a valuable role for our medical system supporting patients. Unfortunately, this tyranny, he has missed out on employment opportunities as a result. The ironic thing about this is that when Darcy required a medical escort, he had nobody available. Due to challenges in our region, it is increasingly difficult to find non-medical travel escorts. Some patients have no families to accompany them, and those close to them are unable to leave them from home, and Darcy is there to save them here. I'd like to thank Darcy and myself and the residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godin, the member Dechel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dare I say it, Mr. Speaker? It seems that spring is coming to our land, the sun is back, and we'll soon see a meltwater at the ends of the ice crossing between the town of Hay River and the reserve. The people of the DAY24 First Nation love the spring, but the closing of the ice crossing over the Hay River is very inconvenient for them. Unfortunately, people will soon be dodging the pockmarks and potholes that riddle the chip seal of the all-season access road linking the reserve to the highway and into Hay River. Last fall, the access road was at its worst. There are drainage problems in addition to the cracks and potholes. People do slow down, but the fact is that too many surface hazards compromise the safety of the road. Mr. Speaker, residents complained to me and to the Chief and Council that the road was so bad that it was causing damage to their vehicles. I have raised this issue with the Minister of Infrastructure before, and remember that there were plans to repair and resurface the road. There was a rare time when I was glad to see a sign ahead, road work ahead. Now that is almost spring. I'm full of optimism that the actual road work is not far ahead. I know that the Minister must regularly drive the access road between Hay River and the reserve and probably feels the burning desire to see the job done in the upcoming construction season. I'm also optimistic that in the time that has passed, the Minister has been able to work out many issues with the Government of Canada about who is responsible for what in maintaining the access road. Mr. Speaker, you can tell the spring sunshine is getting to me, and perhaps all the time we've spent indoors lately. I'm dying to get out there, so I'll make the Minister of Infrastructure a rare offer. Short of putting me on a big machine or handing me a shovel, I'm here to help, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps you'll spend some quality time with me fixing the road access to the Hay River Reserve. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godin, the member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Yellowknife is the gateway to the Slave Geological Province. The Greenstone Belt runs north through Yellowknife, with high potential for generating wealth. In fact, a number of projects are reawakening the area, promising jobs and prosperity for generations to come. There are just 6 high-grade gold districts in Canada, and ours appears to be the most promising. It is the least explored, yet has the greatest potential. The other 5 districts have all been long-term, multi-generational, economic and social drivers for their communities and provinces. But the Yellowknife Gold District dropped off the radar when Giant and Con mines closed. At that time, gold was closer to $225 an ounce. Now it's almost $1,700 per ounce. Mr. Speaker, TerraX has been steadily promoting the Yellowknife City Gold Project. This company has been open, proactive and transparent. It has engaged with numerous stakeholder groups and continues to do so before each year's exploration program. 6 years ago, TerraX started with 26 square kilometers. It's now expanded to 770 square kilometers in an area that includes 3 past-producing mines. It has taken over 10,000 samples, held over 1,000 engagements, drilled over 50 kilometers of core samples, and is always seeking to exploit new technologies. The Yellowknife City Gold Project has grown into a world-class district, and as we know, it opens the corridor north into the Slave Geological Province. In last Wednesday's paper, TerraX listed many of the community recreational, educational, tourism, and scientific events that the company supports. Many of these events share the legacy of exploration trails in the area. Rather than restrict access, TerraX actively promotes the safe, coordinated co-usage of our surrounding trails and ice roads. Mr. Speaker, proponents of the project believe that responsible, environmentally sustainable development can generate a century of social and economic prosperity for the Yellowknife Gold District. It's an opportunity for long-term, multi-generational training, employment, and wealth that can support clean jobs, independent families, and healthy communities well into the future. Mr. Speaker, the Greenstone Belt to the Slave Geological Province holds the potential for wealth that can offer us that future. Mr. Speaker, it's up to us to seize the opportunity and make that future possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Godani, Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Visitors to the Legislative Assembly today may have noticed the Union Jack flying over our building, and that's because today is Commonwealth Day, the annual celebration of the Commonwealth of Nations, which throughout the world is being celebrated by the organization's 53 member states. More than 2.4 billion people live in those 53 nations that make up the Commonwealth, accounting for 30% of the world's population and representing every continent on Earth. The theme of this year's celebrations is Towards a Common Future. This day not only symbolizes the continued connection to our heritage, but demonstrates how institutions that stem from that heritage, like the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, will remain vital for the continued success and prosperity of all sibling nations of the Commonwealth. Earlier today, Her Majesty the Queen attended a multi-faith service at Westminster Abbey and gave her annual address, this year centering on solving important global challenges like ensuring environmental sustainability and promoting fairness and equality. As we enter the 66th year of her reign, the Queen, more now than ever, acts as the living embodiment of stability and continuity, which are the foundational principles of the Commonwealth. Her Majesty's grace and leadership continues to inspire all member nations and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, of which this Assembly is a member. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is an organization which works to support good governance, democracy, and human rights. It strives to create the conditions throughout its member states and all nations of the world where we can work together to secure a more sustainable, prosperous, fairer, and safer Commonwealth for all. I've had the pleasure of being involved with this organization for a few years now and can attest to the work and benefits that come from having this forum for leaders across the 53 nations to meet and accomplish goals that will lead us towards a common future. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to stand as a member of this House and as part of a parliamentary tradition that stretches back hundreds of years. Commonwealth Day is an important opportunity to celebrate this heritage as a beacon for stability in an ever more unstable world. Let's take this time on Commonwealth Day to celebrate the continued peace, order, and good governance Commonwealth nations have fostered together. Let us also recognize the good works brought forth by continued cooperation within our Commonwealth, like the CPA. And finally, let us take a moment to recognize our sovereign, Her Majesty the Queen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy Commonwealth Day, and God save the Queen.
Massey. Member statement. Member Godani, Member Yellowknife Centre.
Massey, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last Thursday I asked some questions of the Minister responsible for the status of women about the N.W.T. Status of Women Council. She indicated that the board, under her direction, is moving the council in a new direction that's contrary to its mandate. Following that discussion, I read the Status of Women Council Act. The legislation says the Council has an outward-looking focus with the following purposes: to develop public awareness of issues affecting the status of women, to promote a change in attitudes so women have equality of opportunity, to encourage discussion on the status of women, to advise the Minister on issues she refers to the Council, to review government policies and legislation, to provide assistance to the Minister in promoting change, and finally, to assist organizations that promote women's equality. Mr. Speaker, the Status of Women Council has a current strategic plan. Its goals mirror those in legislation and provide for a continuation of its current work, excuse me, such as offering campaign schools, chairing the Coalition Against Family Violence, and organizing Family Violence Awareness Week and the December 6th Vigil. It also provides for them to continue in a public role advocating for women's equality. Even though this plan was developed in the time the Minister has been Minister, there is no mention of undertaking gender-based analysis, although the Act provides her with the authority to request this work. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Wise Women Awards have been suspended, we're told, for the time being. The campaign schools are now being offered by the Department of the Executive and Indigenous Affairs. Until today, the Coalition Against Family Violence featured prominently on the EIA website. Looking at this range of changes, I'm concerned that the minister is moving the council away from its core publicly focused mandate and advocacy, and that activities which should remain at arm's length activism are being undertaken under government control. Mr. Speaker, change is inevitable and change may be good, but change behind closed doors and without public consultation that fundamentally alters the Council's presence is unacceptable in a government that prides itself on openness and transparency. I will have questions for the Minister. Massey.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godani, member N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to highlight an exciting event that's taken place here in Yellowknife on April 24th to the 26th. Mr. Speaker, the Arctic Council will hold its Sustainable Development Working Group in town conducting workshops on environmental impact assessments and public participation in the Arctic. Mr. Speaker, this will be the third environmental impact assessment project workshop, following the first an Alaska-themed meaningful engagement of Indigenous people within the environmental impact assessment, and the second one in Finland, themed Nordic possibilities and perspectives to environmental impact assessments in the Arctic. The Arctic Council's Sustainable Development Working Group aims to propose and adopt steps to be taken by the Arctic states to advance sustainable development in the Arctic. The EIA project of this working group aims at taking into consideration local and traditional knowledge to identify solutions that are specific to Arctic nations and a vulnerable Arctic environment. The theme for the Yellowknife workshop will be Good Practices in Arctic Environmental Assessment Impact. Mr. Speaker, this is a great opportunity to get to know some of the important work that the Arctic Council does, especially given the relevancy of the workshop to our resource-rich territory. This is also an opportunity for us to show our expertise not only on environmental assessments, but also in environmental stewardship, Indigenous collaboration, and Indigenous and local knowledge. Mr. Speaker, we expect that all the N.W.T. environmental review boards will attend, as well as Nunavut, Mr. Speaker, as well as some local and Indigenous leaders. The workshop again will take place on April 24th to 26th here in Yellowknife. For more information and to get on the invitation list, contact Matt Bender with Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to seeing our world-class Northern Environmental Impact Review Boards highlighted at this important event. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godani, member Tunade Wolode.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with a heavy heart that I speak today about the passing of a well-known, respected artist named Arthur Beaulieu, who was known to everyone as Archie. Archie was a humble man. He didn't care too much for luxury. He just lived a simple life. He was always smiling, laughing, and joking with those around him. He was inspiration to a lot of youth. Archie is one to break the ground. His career, his fame, financial success were an inspiration to future generations of Betchako. Everything he did was for his family. Those kind words were expressed by Archie's first cousin, Morris Doe. Mr. Speaker, Archie was born August 16, 1952 in Betchako and sadly passed away on November 10, 2017 at age 65. Archie was a son of Joseph Susie Beaulieu and Sarah Zoe. Archie is predeceased by 4 siblings, George, Mary Rose, Therese, and Patrick. Archie is survived by his wife, Rosa Wedwin Beaulieu, his 7 children, Jeffrey, Christine, Brenda, Beamer, Lester, Starr, and Corey, his 4 siblings, Berna, Mabel, Francis, and Alfred. He also had 15 grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, Archie was my cousin. Over the years, I have visited with him many times. I went to see him in his home to look at his art gallery, and he'd also come to my home many times. He was always pleased to see other Kincho artists doing so well. I'd like to extend my condolences to Archie's family, friends, and the community of Betchako. They have truly lost a wonderful person. Marcy Cho, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Our condolences goes out to the family as well. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in gallery. colleagues, I'd like to draw your attention to some visitors in the gallery. We have with us a group of students in a chamber here today. Iko Entreolac from Penticton visiting Yellowknife for the first time. We have a principal and 2 teachers. And also with them is Rock 14. He's a former RCMP member for Yellowknife. I'd just like to say welcome back and thanks for being here with us. Merci.
We also have John Bizot here in the gallery. I'd like to thank him. Also, Francis Erasmus Goodley, welcome. Also, Berna Bolio is also here. I'd like to thank her.
Member for Grace Lake.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize some of the partners of the N.W.T. On the Land Collaborative as visitors in the gallery today. They are Sarah Dennis, the Regional Environmental Coordinator with ENR, Jess Duncan, the Director of On the Land Programs with the N.W.T. Recreations and Parks Association, John Bizot, the Community Advisor for the Talicho region, Winter Haley, Communities and Communications Advisor with Diavik Diamond Mines, Stephen Nita and Barrett Sunny Lenoir with the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, Angela Young, Coordinator, and Jackie Siegel, Project Coordinator with the Indigenous Languages and Education Secretariat at ECE, and Kyla Cackaway Scott, Senior Advisor, Anti-Poverty and Health and Social Services. Welcome, thank you.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Tuna de Woladay.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I gave a eulogy for the late Archie Bolio. I want to recognize Archie's sisters, Berna Bolio, Francis Erasmus, and Mabel Diener, and also his cousins, Louise Bolio and John Bizot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Inuvik Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Roger Epp, the Director of the University of Alberta North, to the House today. And as usual, all the youth that are visiting from Penticton, welcome. I hope you had a good tour and enjoyed the city of Yellowknife. Merci.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I too would like to recognize my friend Roger Epp. He's a professor at the University of Alberta, mostly with political science, but as the minister indicated, he is the director of U Alberta North. And welcome and thank you for being here.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize Deborah Richards. She's my new constituent assistant. She is a former fire chief for the Hamlet of Enterprise, and she is a former youth ambassador. So welcome her. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize Ms. Louise Bolio, who used to work with me at the Yellowknife Women's Society, the homeless shelter for women, and who I consider a close friend. Thank you.
Recognition of visitors in gallery. Recognition of visitors in gallery. If we miss anyone in the gallery, welcome to our proceedings. It's always great to have an audience as part of our proceedings. Merci. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister responsible for the status of women. As I mentioned in my statement, the Status of Women Council strategic plan doesn't anticipate the changes the Minister is now fronting, and yet it was created in her term. Why has she now decided to make these changes? Thank you.
For status of women.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin by clarifying. When I was asked questions the other day on the status of women, if there was anything in my statement that said that I was going to ask the status of women to go against the legislative act, then I sincerely apologize, because it is important as members of the public that we do not lie in the House. So I don't remember making that statement. I will check Hansard, and if I did, I will apologize in advance. And I hope that other members will as well. I don't plan on changing the mandate of the status of women, Mr. Speaker. What I plan to do with the status of women is bring them back to making sure that they work within the Legislative Act, to make sure that they are actually representing the Act, which is what they were formed for. So why they're working on a new strategic plan is because for many years the status of women has said they don't have enough money to get to the communities, to get the voices. So I met with them a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about reviewing their budget to see about how they can actually bring the voices of women to the table, because that is really important. That's what they are regional representatives for. So it's not that they're changing away, that they're going to do something that's different. I want to bring them back, Mr. Speaker, to the purpose of the Status of Women, which is enacting the Status of Women Act, Council Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nakira Kasi member Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to review both the Act and the strategic plan. I'm unclear how the board is not currently enacting the Act. Could the minister explain? Thank you.
Minister responsible for status of women.
So, Mr. Speaker, there are things they are doing that fall within the Act, and there's things that within the Act say they may do. There's some major pieces within the Act that we need to get back to, and like I was saying. So it's right. It's right that it doesn't say gender-based analysis, but Section 3(1)(e) within the Status of Women Council Act says that the Council purpose is to review policies and legislation affecting women and to report its finding to the relevant government departments or agencies. So when I, Mr. Speaker, look at reviewing policies and legislation on things that affect women, again, I may be incorrect, but my interpretation of the Act, and the Act is about interpretation, says that is gender-based analysis. So I want to bring them back to that. Another piece of the Act that it says, Section 3(1)(f) in brackets, says to provide assistance to the minister in promoting changes to ensure the attainment of equality of women. And Section 3(1) brackets D, to advise the minister on issues that the minister may refer to the council for consideration. So, and I hate to bring this out in public, but it's in public. So when I did meet with them, I talked to them about my need to meet with them. For the last couple of years, I've been asking them to meet with me. They only have 2 meetings in Yellowknife, and each time they've had the meetings, it's been during session, which has made it really difficult for me to actually meet with them, except for to go in and do a welcoming speech at lunch. They haven't been able to meet after session hours. So I did speak with them the other day and said we need to have a face-to-face meeting, at least 4 hours. I'm not sure how we can work together, the Status of Women Council and the minister responsible for Status of Women, if we can't meet in 2 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I apologize for bringing this public, but it is in the public, and so that is what I want to do. I want to sit with them, regain back their original mandate, make sure they're following the Act, make sure we support each other as best as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tadare Kasi member Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said in my statement, the minister, of course, can ask the council for advice, including gender-based analysis. Let's take a couple of these changes and break them down. Can the minister confirm that the Wise Women Awards were not offered this year because the council is no longer eligible for the pot of funding that funded them? Thank you.
Merci. Minister responsible for Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is totally incorrect. From my understanding, the Status of Women did put out nominations. It closed in February. I'm not sure of the exact date. They stated that they couldn't do the awards because of financial limitations. So those are things that we're looking at within their budget. As stated before, they are looking at their budget to see how they can best provide the services that they need to provide for that. We do have a pot of funding. It's a small pot. It's $50,000 a year. The Status of Women never applied on that this year, Mr. Speaker, and that's why they weren't. So it wasn't that they couldn't get the money. You need to apply on the money to obtain the money. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Nundere Cassie member, Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the clarification from the Minister. My last question in this set is, we've recently had a couple of successful campaign schools. They were organized by the Department of the Executive and Indigenous Affairs. And I understood that this was the case because the Status of Women currently is very short-staffed. Can the Minister confirm that the move of the campaign schools to government in the form of Executive Indigenous Affairs is only temporary? Merci.
Merci. Minister responsible for Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the move to bring it in to government at this point actually wasn't because of any animosity or any other reason. The reason was because the previous status or councils that were done for, campaign schools for women that were done focused on just the Legislative Assembly. It was when we did the first workshop during my term in Hay River, it was quickly realized that if we focused just on the Legislative Assembly, that we were defeating our purpose. There was a lot of women that didn't want to run for it because they had childcare issues, they didn't want to do the amount of traveling, they didn't want to leave their communities, they had obligations, a host of reasons. So we decided to expand our campaign schools. We decided that it was important for women in leadership not only to be here, that would be my ideal, to have equal representation, but to actually leadership isn't only in the Legislative Assembly. We needed to look at municipal governments. We needed to look at Aboriginal governments. We needed to look at even education authorities. All elected positions need to be considered. So we took it internally just for the short term to look at how we can actually meet all of those components. At this point, we're still evaluating. We've just done our new deliveries with it. We will be evaluating the program, and then we will be deciding where we go forward with that. Mr. Speaker, my job is to support the Status of Women Council. The Status of Women's Council is to support me as Minister of Status of Women. I want to work closely with them. We just need to make sure that the campaign school is meeting the needs of residents, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Canada member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today you heard my members take a statement about non-medical escorts and the important role they cover for our residents. So my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Does the Department of Health and Social Services have a policy in place that would compensate non-medical travel escorts for their time away from their place of employment? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, approved non-medical escorts are provided the same medical travel benefits as the patients that they're supporting and escorting. This is coverage for travel, for meals, accommodations, and local ground transportation in accordance with the policies. Neither patients nor escorts are compensated for time away from work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nakira Cassie member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. Since the department doesn't have a policy in place, do they have something in place to at least provide some sort of incidental funding for the person so that they can get shampoo and stuff like that they forget back at home? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when patients stay in the boarding home, they're provided with meals, and there's light foods available throughout the day, things like sandwiches and fruit juices, cookies, so that if they miss a meal, those are there. If they are in transit for a day, they can claim the $18 a day to offset the cost of incidentals. When patients stay in private or commercial accommodations, they receive meal per diems in accordance with the policies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tadare, Council Member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister for giving us that update and that information. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister please advise this House what happens if the non-medical escort cannot eat the food available at the boarding home? Does the government at least reimburse that person for their costs? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the cost of the boarding home includes accommodation, it includes meals, light snacks, as well as ground transportation for patients, as I've already indicated. The cost of the boarding homes is in the range of about $200 a day. The boarding homes provide a variety of meals throughout the day, and they try to have traditional food on the menu when it's made available to them. When given notice, Mr. Speaker, when somebody lets them know, the boarding home can also accommodate specific medically required diets, things to help individuals who are diabetic or cardiac patients who have like a low salt requirement. However, they are providing food for a large number of guests, and personal preference cannot be always accommodated. But if the person has some dietary issues, if they let them know, it can often be accommodated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundere, Council Member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. With the challenges that we're facing trying to get people to be non-medical escorts here, will the Minister look at developing a policy, or even better, come up with a way to compensate future non-medical travel escorts so they can continue to provide this valuable service to patients obligated to travel to meet their medical needs? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we do have a number of revisions to the medical travel policy currently under development, and I hope to share those proposed revisions with the Standing Committee in the next couple of weeks, if not next month for sure. I can tell you that increasing financial supports for non-medical escorts is not one of the proposed changes, so compensating them for time away from work is not one of the changes that we're proposing. As part of our work, Mr. Speaker, we have reviewed medical travel programs from across the country as well as other jurisdictions, and except for Nunavut, the benefits that we're providing here are far greater than most other jurisdictions. We're basically on par with Nunavut. Our system needs to rely on friends and family supporting patients who are required to travel. Further, Mr. Speaker, our system is designed to help offset the costs, not cover the costs or cover all costs. If patients are unable to find an escort to support them in their medical travel journey, the authority will work with patients to help develop solutions. I should also note, Mr. Speaker, that in 2016-17, we had over 5,500 medical travel cases where an escort was involved. Increasing benefits or compensating escorts for their time away from work would have a significant impact on system costs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Canada Member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are to the Minister responsible for the Power Corporation. It's with regard to future development of mines in the territory, and in particular in the North Slave region. Mr. Speaker, we know that energy is, of course, one of the largest factors, one of the largest costs to running a mine. Hard rock mines, in particular, use nearly twice the energy that diamond mines do. But at the same time, we're trying to attract global investment to come here. And we know that other jurisdictions around the country have power and energy at a fraction of the cost of what we can charge here. Yellowknife area, for example, is 37 cents a kilowatt hour. Other regions, it's 8 cents a kilowatt hour. I'd like to ask the Minister, what is the Minister going to do to make the cost of power in the N.W.T. competitive in the world marketplace? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister responsible for N.W.T. Power Corp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we are interested in these type of developments. We do realize that the cost of power is quite high in the Northwest Territories, particularly in comparison with some other jurisdictions such as Quebec and Manitoba. We are in discussions with mining companies because we do hope that we will have additional customers, because the only way really of keeping prices down is to find new customers either here in the Northwest Territories or by exporting power to the south. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nakita Council Member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I recognize that I appreciate what the minister has to say in that the territorial government certainly does recognize mining as a large part and an essential part of our economy. Frankly, mines currently have no option but to rely on carbon fuels for their operations. But unfortunately, they also happen to be some of our largest emitters, followed by transportation industry, which also is primarily because they too support the mines. And so, you know, the N.W.T, we're proposing that we need to significantly reduce our carbon emissions. I would like to ask the minister, how does the Power Corporation intend to help the government of the Northwest Territories reduce our greenhouse gas or meet our greenhouse gas targets while promoting mining? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister responsible for N.W.T Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member opposite is quite correct. The mining companies are some of our largest emitters. In the future, it would seem to me likely that the only way to radically reduce those levels of emission would be by supplying hydropower. So we would have to look and would be prepared to look at hydro expansion, whether Tallston or otherwise. Thank you.
Oral question, Tadarea Council Member Yellowknife North.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that reply. And okay, that'll leads me into my last question. Then, you know, does the minister see any realistic options other than the large-scale hydro dams or transmitting power from the Canadian grid to provide reliable environmental sustainability? Does the minister see, other than big major mega projects, what are the other alternatives that mines have in order to produce affordable energy? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister responsible for N.W.T Power Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, the Power Corporation has been in discussion with several mining companies looking at other alternatives such as LNG. However, as I said, long term, it seems to me that the most efficacious way of reducing the greenhouse emissions would likely by hydro expansion, whether a large project like Tallston or a smaller expansion of other hydro projects. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, Nodere Council Member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your indulgence. For one more question, I appreciate that I said the last question was my last question, but in fact, I'd like to know if the minister is having any discussions around the idea of nuclear, in particular, molten salt reactors and mini nuclear reactors, and is that a power option that the minister is considering? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister responsible for N.W.T Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we would be prepared to look at any options, though nuclear wouldn't seem to be the top of the list. It is a controversial form of supplying power. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, Canada Member Tunade Walade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Friday I made a member statement about dialysis and N.W.T. I'd like to ask the Minister of Health and Social Services some questions on that. I'd like to know if the minister could possibly commit to looking at providing accommodation in locations where individuals go for dialysis. So at this point, I'm thinking that the majority of the patients come to either Yellowknife, Hay River, or into Alberta to get their dialysis. And so dialysis is something that happens 3 times a week for approximately 4 to 5 hours per session. So the travel on top of that is a bit much. I'd like to ask the minister if they would, with the department themselves, would look at accommodation in those communities. Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, right now we deal with them on an individual basis, depending on where the individual is coming from, how long they have to be in the community, whichever community happens to be, whether it's Hay River or Yellowknife for their treatment. And if they have to stay overnight, obviously we'll be accommodating them. If they're in during the day, we'll certainly transport them to the facility and transport them back to the airport. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to dialysis, we've expanded our dialysis services here in the Northwest Territories. We have peritoneal dialysis available through a partnership with the province of Alberta, so that people could do dialysis in their homes where possible, where appropriate. We know this is a fairly invasive procedure. We want to work with our residents to create the simplest, most humane process for dealing with dialysis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council Member Trinity Willoughby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree and that home dialysis is an option, and I'd like to ask the minister, staying with that type of dialysis, I'd like to ask the minister if there could be more family members for each individual that would be receiving home dialysis, more family members trained. I had an elder that was on dialysis in a community of Futsalke. At one point, he felt like he was really burdening his daughter-in-law, because she's the only one that was trained to give dialysis. I'd like to ask the minister if there's an option to train several family members on home dialysis for a patient. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the peritoneal dialysis, which is the one that's done at home, the patient and their support person have to go to Alberta for a couple weeks to actually be fully trained on how to provide that service. And then they're actually supported by the Alberta Health Services in their delivery, so they have a constant contact with that individual. I hear the member. I mean, yeah, and people go on holidays, people may be out of the community, so it is a burden. So I hear the member. I'll have the department look at it to see what it would take to provide that training to more than one person so that there is that flexibility. I don't know what those costs would be, so I'm not prepared to commit 100% to actually doing it, but we'll explore it to see what the cost would be and how we can work with our residents to make this process as safe and seamless as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council Member Trinity Willoughby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like you can imagine, there's various ways that dialysis can be provided to patients. I'd like to ask the minister if they would look at an option of providing dialysis in health centers. I recognize that there may be a community with no patients on dialysis, so then we would not necessitate that, but something that's easy to move into a health center, so it's not maybe a little better system than what they have in the home, but having something in the health centers where dialysis patients exist. I'd like to ask the minister if he could look at that option. Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the hemodialysis is a very complex process that actually involves removing the blood from the human, putting it through a machine, and inserting it back in the human. So it's very complex. You need highly trained individuals to do it, and the machines need thorough cleaning after every use to make sure there's no contamination or harm caused to our patients. So it's a very complex process. We're putting it in our hospitals. We put it in Stanton. There's an expanded area in the new Stanton for dialysis. We've put it in Hay River. There's an expanded area in Hay River where it is. We have to work with our individual patients on a one-on-one basis. Sometimes their level of treatment is different than, say, somebody else's. Having said all that, Mr. Speaker, there is mobile hemodialysis units that have been utilized in other jurisdictions, and we have explored that to see if it's a possibility. However, in the Northwest Territories, road access, road maintenance, the quality of some of the roads, given the fragile nature of the machines, as well as some of the water supply we need. We need sterilized water. We need water that has got no other chemicals or no other things in it. Really limits our ability to do the mobile hemodialysis. When it comes to individuals with complex needs, we do transport them from their communities to where the service is available. In some cases, we have had to do some medical relocation, working with the families to bring them to those communities where the service is on a permanent basis. So we're open to being flexible, but at the end of the day, whatever we have to do or whatever we're going to do has to be safe, and we're not comfortable that the mobile hemodialysis is appropriate for the Northwest Territories at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. No dire council member Tunade Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the mobile dialysis that the minister spoke of also exists in Alberta. And so they have it set up on the bus. And I know the minister knows all of this, but I'd like to ask the minister if he could at least look at that system that Alberta has, where they've upgraded a bus. Retrofitted a bus in order to handle a dialysis machine or a couple of dialysis machines. I recognize that the cost is probably over $2 million, but I'd like to ask the minister if they would look at that and see what success Alberta has had with that system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've already had a cursory look at that, and one of the benefits they have is, high-end highways that are paved, smooth, and they're usually transporting or going between communities that are a little larger, that have access to the sterilized water and the other things that they need to make sure that the equipment is properly cleaned and those types of things. In the light of the fact that many of our roads aren't paved in the Northwest Territories, and we don't always have direct access to the level of sterilization in the water that would be necessary for hemodialysis, recognizing how complex it is, we did feel that it was safe at this time to pursue that option, which is why we have entered into a partnership and arrangements with the health services in Alberta to do the peritoneal dialysis. And as I said, from time to time, we have had to enter into one-on-one relationships that have resulted in medical relocation. We don't have a policy on that, but it is something we're exploring because it may become more necessary. Having said all that, Mr. Speaker, we all need to work together to encourage healthy living, healthy eating, exercise, and living as healthy as possible so that we don't have to go down this road of dialysis. It's an invasive procedure. It is life-saving, yes, but for the most part, people who live healthy lifestyles will be able to avoid this particular treatment. And I think we need to, as members, focus more on prevention to avoid having to need this service in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Infrastructure. Just in a couple of days, will be thousands of people will be in Hay River, and a lot of them will be traveling to the Hay River Reserve via the smooth and cool natural ice bridge. But time, of course, right now, spring is coming, and people will be converging in Hay River, so the whole world will be watching. So no pressure on to the minister, but what is the status of plans to repair and resurface the access road to the N.W.T First Nation community at Hay River? Merci.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member knows, in 2010 there was a major reconstruction on this section of road between the highway and the Hay River Reserve. We continue to have issues with this moving forward. There's continued drainage issues along this road that we're trying to address. We've did a significant ditching program this past summer last year to address some of this, and we are looking at how we will continue to improve on it. We've had to return some of the chip seal to gravel to address some of the issues on this section of road, and we will continue to have a look at it going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one role that I understand that the Minister takes quite seriously is public safety. So my next question is, what is the Department of Infrastructure's assessment of the safety of the Hay River Reserve access road? Massey.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said in this House a number of times, safety is our #1 priority. This section of road is regularly maintained by the department, and the repairs and drainage improvements are done as required, and we will continue to assess this road as we move forward, as I've said, and we will make sure it's open and for use for public use and it's safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tada Council Member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just recently the Minister had indicated that there's some funding commitments from the federal government in terms of the transportation corridor. So I want to understand what barriers, if any, stand in the way of getting this work done. Merci.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there's any barriers in the way. We need to assess what's going on. We're going to have our engineers go in there this spring to have a look at this and assess the problems that we're having with this section of road. We're going to do a topographical survey of this section of road to help identify what do we need to remediate this section of road and what efforts need to be put into it, and what challenges we have on ongoing maintenance going forward. So once we have the engineering people go in there and have a look at it, then we'll see what we're going to do going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundere Council Member Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for clarifying a few things. My last question is, what steps has the Minister or his department taken to resolve this matter with the Government of Canada and their obligations to the Acknowledgements First Nations? Merci.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe this section of road is our responsibility. It's through a transfer agreement that was signed in the early 1990s that this section of road was turned over to us, so it's our responsibility going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Ikeda County, the member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. It's to do with the Elders Home Heating Subsidy, which is a great program, I may add. Elders have the option to either receive home heating fuel or cordwood, or a combination of both, whichever the elders prefer. We have been having challenges with payments in Fort McPherson for the people who are providing cordwood for the elders. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister, will the Minister enter into an agreement with either the band, the designated Gwich'in organization, or if it's in Aklavik, the Aklavik Community Corporation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The agreement would be for to provide paying those bills to the people instead of going through the EC&E's process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have very well-trained client service officers in all of our communities, and they do updated training on a yearly basis. And every community has a unique situation, and I understand the situation in McPherson with the payments and some of the suppliers not getting paid on time. That's something that we can take a look into, but at this moment, what we will do is we'll make sure that the client service officers in the community are aware of this situation, and that we'll touch base with them and make sure that we can see if we can be a little bit more efficient. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Kirare Council Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've had constituents waiting up to 2 to 3 weeks. You know, they've been patient, but, you know, especially at times during Christmas, you know, we've had challenges finding people to actually provide cordwood because we had hardly any snow before Christmas, and it was very challenging getting out there. So those people that did come forward, you know, many of them had to wait till after Christmas to actually get paid, which is very unfortunate because especially the times back home where there's hardly any work, you know. So I know in the past when I was the chief of Sigachik, we had an agreement with EC&E to pay those people that provided this service to our community, and then, you know, those organizations have that flexibility to invoice the department at a later date. So will the minister ensure for next year that they enter into agreements with those communities to provide that service? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do understand that some of our suppliers, especially when it comes to wood, use their own gas, their own time, their own machines to go out and cut the wood, and that they incur expenses as well in terms of us getting them their payments. We can't comment in terms of the individual cases that we have with some of our clients, but come April 1st, we're making some enhancements to the senior home heating subsidy, and that we will look into such an agreement if the member said that he did have an agreement in previous governments. We can take a look at those options and look at them into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question. Tada ikere carrying the member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And I've switched this up a little bit. I did give the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources a heads up, but earlier today I spoke about the poor efforts by the federal government to incorporate specific northern benefits targets into the contracting for the giant mine remediation. So I'd like to know from the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources, what is he prepared to do to ensure that N.W.T, D-Low, DETA, and Yellowknife residents and businesses benefit from the more than $1 billion giant mine remediation? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as members are aware, the main construction management contract was awarded in December of 2017. The departments of ITIE and our ECN infrastructure, we have an interdepartmental working group. We've had some updates from the Giant Mine Remediation Project team on the procurement and socioeconomic issues, specifically in terms of reference for the main construction contract, in addition to any other tendering documents. We have had opportunities to provide some input into the contract documents, but not on the federal government process. So we will, being early in the awarding of the contract, we will continue to work with the main construction manager to ensure that there are opportunities for northern workforce and northern skilled people to be working on the project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, the Kitadaya member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to thank the Minister for that response. The federal government just doesn't seem to have any policies or ability to require northern and Indigenous benefits targets into the contracts for giant mine remediation. So can the Minister tell us whether there has been any consideration given to flowing the work and or funding through N.W.T to better incorporate such benefits targets? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Indigenous involvement in the project are considered through the use of the Aboriginal Opportunities Consideration within the federal government processing system, and we will have to work with the contract to ensure that they recognize that there are a lot of folks up here that can do the work and try utilize them. I think it'd be beneficial for the project and beneficial for the locals. As far as flowing the money through the GNWT, I mean, it is a federal responsibility to clean up a giant mine. I take the member's point, though, where we would have, we'd be much more recognizing the fact that we need a lot of northern involvement. But I can assure members that we have had some updates from the contractor. I'm sure as we go into the process, we'll have more updates from the contractor, and we'll continue to make our views known. And I'm sure just being awarded so just recently, there's still some work they have to do in identifying potential businesses that they could utilize during the construction of this, or the remediation work that's going on. But as we become updated, and I will keep the members of this House updated as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question, Council Member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to thank the Minister for that. I'm just worried, though, that with the $600 million contract already out there, that this is starting to slip away from us. So later today, I'm going to table a letter from the Giant Mine Oversight Board that's quite critical of the current approach on socioeconomic benefits by the federal government. There's no overall plan. Engagement is encouraged instead of real targets. Non-Indigenous Northerners have not been included in the approach to date. No economic impacts are predicted, and so on. But perhaps most importantly, a collaborative consultative process is recommended to develop a socioeconomic benefits plan. Does the Minister support a broad consultative process to develop a socioeconomic benefits plan for the Giant Mine remediation project? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're always supportive of anything that allows us to take advantage of northern business opportunities. And I mean, Giant Mine remediation project is very complex and operations. So, as I said before, we will work with the main construction manager. We'll make our views known. And if there's opportunities, and I'm sure they're doing their due diligence now, if there's opportunities to utilize northern business as part of the remediation, then it would benefit both the project and the northern business. Again, we realize that there's a lot of money that's being put into this remediation, and I will ensure the members that between myself and the ministers of ITI and all other departments in the interdepartmental working group we'll reach out and see if we can get some information as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council Member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to thank the Minister again for that response. But, you know, this remediation project is clearly the beginning of a lot more work that's going to happen here. And clearly there's an emerging remediation economy, given the requirements of the devolution agreement and new accounting practices where contaminated sites are entered into the public accounts as liabilities until remediated. So I'm wondering what our government is doing in terms of things like possibly reorienting the Mine Training Society towards remediation. What are we doing in terms of trades, apprenticeships, and so on? So can the Minister tell us what N.W.T is doing to get better prepared for the coming environmental remediation economy, and how we can better get prepared for all the remediation work that's about to begin over the next several years? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I take the member's point as well taken. We do recognize that there is a remediation economy that is coming. I think we've seen a demonstration of that on the Canal Trail, for example, but that one too, they brought, I believe, a southern company in, and that was through the federal government. So we have to ensure, and it's much like hazmat remediation in units that were built a number of years ago. We see that as another economy, because the Housing Corporation, unfortunately, can't take down a lot of their houses until they've had hazmat remediation. And I do know a few businesses that have taken some hazmat remediation training, which is good. And I think as we get into more of the environmental remediation and the remediation type work, we should encourage more business out there to seek the expertise that they can take advantage of all the work, because I think I heard the members say at one time there's like 700 sites that may need to be remediated. So we need to position the people in the Northwest Territories, the business in the Northwest Territories, and I think it's a broad discussion we need to have as a cabinet if there's any training opportunities that we could possibly have our people taken across Northwest Territories. So it is a whole new economy, and I think we need to position ourselves and our people to be the ones that are best prepared for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Excuse me, I have a few more questions for my colleague, the Minister responsible for the status of women. I heard her say that the campaign schools were being offered by the Department of Executive and Indigenous Affairs in the short term. I'm wondering if she's prepared over the long term to commit to taking the campaign schools back to the status of women and asking them to retool the content so that it reaches people who are running for all orders of government. Thank you.
Minister responsible for status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As stated earlier, we are just in the stage of renewing it and making it fit to the people more appropriately. We will be doing an evaluation. At that point, we will be deciding what we're going to do with it. I also want to state, though, that we are looking at expanding it so that it can meet more of the needs of people and addressing municipal, Indigenous governments, for example, but also the budget. We want to make sure that we can do it the most cost-effective way to be able to reach the most communities. It's important. These are important schools. They actually make a difference in women's lives. So we're looking at it from not only from one aspect, from many aspects. So once we're finished that work, I would be more than interested to work with the status of women to actually see if they can take this on again, because I've stated many, many times, my understanding is the status of women has a defined role, and part of that is supporting the Minister of the Status of Women. And so it would be just logical, Mr. Speaker, that they would assist me in that work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Kitadea, Cassie member, Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister's answer. Where I'm coming from is that I think as a matter of principle, we don't want civil servants to train future politicians. We want that to happen at arm's length. And the status of women has had lots of experience in this area, and I think that once they're back up to speed, that'll be the they should be the go-to group. Now, there was a review of the campaign schools in 2017. It's never been made public. Can the Minister commit to making it public? Thank you.
Minister responsible for status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't make that commitment at this time. I need to go back and look at it. The review that we did was an internal, and it wasn't actually done under my direction. It was just an employee that offered to assist us with that. So I have to go back and look at it to determine was that a formal report, or was that just a volunteer that was assisting us with looking at making the campaign school better. So I'm not sure if it was a paid position or just a volunteer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Kitadea, Cassie member, Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, to refresh the memory of the Minister, this work was undertaken by a member of the Department of Executive. She is a paid government employee working on the evaluation of the campaign school. So I wonder if the Minister could take that into account when she's asking the question of her staff about making the report public. Thank you.
Minister responsible for status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, I will take that into consideration. I just want to note that a lot of people that work for the government actually have a real concern. They want more women in leadership. So my understanding, and I will check on that because I may be wrong, is that the majority, actually I think all of them except for my special advisor, actually were not paid for any of the work that they've done for the campaign schools. It's tended to be on the weekends, on our own times. So I will confirm if that is true, because it's important to note. If it is not true, I will come back to the Speaker and stand up formally and make a formal clarification. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
See. Oral question, N.W.T, Cassie member, Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, let me make a clarification of my own. The evaluation was completed by a member of the Department of the Executive and Indigenous Affairs. I'm not talking about the staffing at the campaign schools. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering, given the fact that the Minister is encouraging the Council, working with the Council, directing the Council to refocus its role, whether she plans to consult the public about this refocus and whether there'll be an input for people, there'll be an opportunity for people to give their views on the status of Women Council and its mandate. Thank you.
Minister responsible for status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that public being accountable to the public and having the most input from the public is advisable. I don't want to make it a public show. What I will do, though, is I will commit to doing a survey to find out from, and hopefully from all residents, but especially for women. This is the status of women, so trying to get a gender-based viewpoint on what the women residents and young girls and women residents of the Northwest Territories feel that we should be doing as the status of women. I will commit to doing that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral questions. Oral questions. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents entitled Supplementary Estimates, Infrastructure Expenditures, number 4, 2017-18, and Supplementary Estimates, Operation Expenditures, number 4, 2017-2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to table the following document. It's from the Giant Mine Oversight Body. It's a letter dated February the 22nd, 2018, regarding socioeconomic issues, and it's to the Deputy Director, Giant Mine Remediation Project. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Pursuant to Section 14 of the Indemnities, Allowances, and Expense Regulation of Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, I hereby table the statutory declaration of principal residence of the member for N.W.T. dated March 1st, 2018. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Minister Maka, Minister for Community Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Wednesday, March 14, 2018, I will move that Bill 8, Emergency Management Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Motions. Motions. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River South, that Bill 7, Chartered Professional Accountants Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Motions in order. Motions non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Merci. Bill 7 has had its first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole bills and other matters. Minister Statement 1-18.3, Minister Statement 19-18.3, Table Document 63-18.3, Table Document 135-18.3, and Table Document 136-18.3 with Member Hay River North in a chair.
I will now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee would like to consider Table Document 63-18, brackets 3, main estimates 2018-2019. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Last time we left off with conclusion of the last department for consideration. So, does committee agree that on March 8th, I'm sorry, 1 second. Thank you, committee. As I was saying, we concluded our consideration of the Department of Infrastructure, which was the final department to consider in the main estimates. So does committee agree that we have concluded consideration of table document 63-18(3), main estimates 2018-2019? Thank you, committee. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that consideration of table document 6318(3), main estimates 2018-2019, now be concluded, and that table document 63-18(3) be reported and recommended as ready for further consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. The motion is on the floor and being distributed. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Consideration of table document 63-18(3) is now concluded, and we will be reported as ready for further consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the chairman rise and report progress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. There's a motion to report progress. The motion is in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. I will rise and report progress.
May I have the report, Member Hay River North?
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 63-18(3), main estimates 2018-2019. I would like to report progress with one motion carried, and that consideration of table document 63-18(3) is concluded, and that the House concur in those estimates, and that an appropriation bill to be based thereon be introduced without delay. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with.
Do I have a seconder? Member for Mackenzie Delta. Motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Madam Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Tuesday, March 13th, 2018, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, 2 minister statements, 3 member statements, 4 reports of standing and special committees, 5 returns to oral questions, 6 recognition of visitors in the gallery, 7 acknowledgements, 8 oral questions, 9 written questions, 10, returns to written questions. 11, replies to the Commissioner's opening address. 12, petitions. 13, reports of committees on the review of bills. 14, tabling of documents. 15, notices of motion. 16, notices of motion for first reading of bills. 17, motions. 18, first reading of bills. 19, second reading of bills. Bill 7. 20, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters. Minister Statement 1-18.3, Minister Statement 19-18.3, Table Document 135-18.3, Table Document 136-18.3. Report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Merci, Madam Clerk. This House stands adjourned till Tuesday, March 13, 2018, 1:30 p.m.